The Pacific Ocean, somewhere west of Guam. An E-2D Hawkeye is banking hard at 25,000 feet when its radar picture goes ugly all at once. 40 discrete contacts, low and fast, fanning out across a 70-mile arc, inbound to a single point on the surface. That point is the USS Gerald R. Ford. $13 billion of American naval power, 5,000 sailors, and the most capable air wing on the planet. And right now, cheap drones are doing exactly what they were designed to do. Make the math work against it. This is a hypothetical scenario, built from real capabilities for education and entertainment. What you're about to watch is how the US Navy fights a swarm, not with brute force, but with a kill chain that runs on information, timing, and the hardest kind of discipline, knowing when not to shoot. Here's the thing, nobody says out loud in the carrier debate. The question was never whether the Ford could survive a missile. It's whether it can survive 40 missiles that cost $20,000 each, when every interceptor on the ship costs 200 times that. The swarm doesn't have to win. It just has to drain the magazine before the weapon that matters arrives. Stay with this, because by the end, you'll understand why a supercarrier's survival depends not on its armor or its escorts, but on a radar plane orbiting at altitude and a decision made in the first 90 seconds. Let's set the board. The Ford Strike Group is operating in the Western Pacific, roughly 400 miles from the nearest landmass. The group is in standard cruising disposition. The carrier at center, 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers on the forward arc, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser to port, a Virginia-class submarine running silent beneath. Air wing aircraft are cycling through the pattern. It is, by any measure, the most powerful conventional surface force in the world. The threat approaching them does not care. What the radar picture shows the E-2D crew is a coordinated wave of one-way attack drones, loitering munitions launched from a surface vessel well over the horizon. Think of them as flying pipe bombs with autopilots. Each one costs roughly $20,000. Each one carries enough explosive to punch through a destroyer's superstructure or start a serious fire on a flight deck. Individually, they're manageable. In groups of 40, they're an economics problem. Threading through the back of that swarm, not yet visible on radar, is something else. A sea-skimming anti-ship missile, flying so low it's essentially invisible until it pops over the horizon at 12 miles. That missile is the actual threat. The drones are the invoice the defender has to pay before it arrives. This is the strategic logic behind the swarm. It's not clever because it's fast. It's clever because it's cheap. A single SM-6 interceptor costs approximately $4 million. The Ford's escorts collectively carry 90 vertical launch system cells, and those cells hold everything. Strike weapons, anti-submarine rockets, and air defense missiles sharing the same finite magazine. A 40-drone wave, if it forces 40 SM-6 shots, has just spent $80,000 to drain $160 million of American firepower. And the ship that launched the drones is already reloading. Put yourself in the strike group commander's position for a second. You have a radar picture showing 40 inbound contacts, an unknown number of additional launch assets over the horizon, and a magazine you cannot replenish at sea. Every shot you take is a decision that cannot be undone. This is where the E-2D Hawkeye changes the geometry of the problem entirely. The E-2D is not a weapon. It carries no missiles, no guns. What it carries is an AN/API-9 radar rotating inside that distinctive disc on its back, capable of tracking over 2,000 contacts simultaneously at ranges exceeding 300 miles. Flying at altitude, it sees over the horizon that hides the Sea-Skimmer from the ships below. And because it's networked into the strike group via Link 16 data link, every radar contact the Hawkeye sees appears simultaneously on every ship's combat system display. The group fights as one sensor picture, not as 5 separate ships squinting at their own screens. Think of it this way. The Hawkeye is the referee who can see the whole chessboard from above, calling out every piece while the players below can only see their own half. Without it, the Ford's escorts are reacting to threats that are already close. With it, they're engaging threats that are still far enough away for the intercept to be clean. The E-2D crew classifies the contacts. 40 drones, first wave. They're flying in a spread formation designed to saturate radar coverage. Not coming in a single column where one intercept geometry works, but in a fan, forcing the ships to split their fire across a wide arc. Smart. And behind the drones, at the edge of the radar picture, a faint return. Intermittent, sea-skimming, doing its best to hide. The missile. The Hawkeye's controller passes the picture to the cruiser's Aegis combat system. The system begins building firing solutions. And here, the first hard decision of the fight arrives. Which layer of the kill chain engages first? And at what range? There is a kill chain. It's layered by design, and each layer is a different answer to a different version of the same question. How close is the threat, and how much is it worth spending to stop it here? Layer 1 is SM-6. The Standard Missile-6 is a long-range air defense interceptor with an active radar seeker, meaning it can find and home on its own target without the launching ship holding it on a radar beam all the way to impact. That matters in a swarm fight because the Aegis system can loft multiple SM-6 rounds simultaneously and let them sort themselves to targets. Range out to beyond 130 nautical miles, Mach 3.5 in terminal flight. Against a slow-moving drone at altitude, it is dramatically overpowered, which is exactly the problem. Firing SM-6 at $20,000 drones is like using a rifle round to swat a housefly. You'll hit the fly. You'll also spend $4 million and burn a VLS cell that can't be replaced until the group returns to port. Do it 40 times, and you're combat ineffective before the real weapon arrives. So the doctrine is not to use SM-6 on the full swarm. The doctrine is to use SM-6 on the swarm's most dangerous elements. The ones that are fastest, the ones on the most direct inbound vector, the ones that track geometry suggests are targeting the carrier specifically rather than the escorts. Triage by threat level, not by kill probability. The Aegis system handles the sorting. Humans approve the shots. Here's what most people get wrong about magazine depth. It's not just about how many missiles you have. It's about the ratio between what you spend per engagement and what the enemy spends per drone. The Navy calls this cost exchange. When that ratio flips, when you're spending more per kill than the attacker spends per drone, the attacker is winning even if every intercept succeeds. 6 SM-6 rounds go out in the first salvo, targeted at the forward edge of the swarm, the drones that have achieved the tightest inbound geometry. At Mach 3.5, the intercepts are quick. 6 contacts vanish from the picture. 34 remain. The group survives the first salvo. But that was only the first wave. Here's something that nagged at me when I went through the doctrine on layered naval defense. The system isn't designed to be perfect in each layer. It's designed to be good enough in each layer, so that whatever gets through is fewer and slower, and at a range where the next layer can handle it cleanly. It's a series of filters, not a wall. Layer 2 is ESSM, the Evolved Sea Sparrow Missile. Where SM-6 is a strategic asset, ESSM is a workhorse, quad-packed into standard VLS cells, meaning 4 ESSM fit in the space, 1 SM-6 occupies. It gives the group dramatically more shots per cell at mid-range engagements out to roughly 50 kilometers. Against drone-sized targets, it's cost-effective in a way SM-6 simply isn't. At roughly $1 million per round, you're still spending 50 times the cost of the drone you're intercepting, but the magazine depth is there to sustain the fight longer. The Arleigh Burke destroyers on the forward arc open up with ESSM as the remaining wave closes inside 60 kilometers. The combat system is allocating shots automatically now. The human operators are monitoring, approving, but the Aegis algorithms are matching interceptors to targets at a speed no human fire control team could match manually. Targets are being assigned, missiles are away, and the radar picture is thinning. 22 drones intercepted across both layers, 12 remaining. And the sea-skimming missile has just crossed inside radar coverage at 12 miles, screaming in at Mach 2.5, 10 meters above the wave tops. Here's the physics of why that missile is so hard to stop. A radar wave travels in a straight line, the Earth curves. A missile flying at 10 meters altitude stays below the radar horizon of a surface ship until it's catastrophically close. Inside the engagement envelope of every long-range system, past the effective range of ESSM and terminal geometry, arriving at a speed that gives the Phalanx CIWS approximately 4 seconds of engagement time. 4 seconds. This is the threat the entire preceding engagement was designed to isolate. Not to make it easy to stop. It's never easy. But to make sure it arrives alone, not surrounded by a swarm that has already exhausted the close-in defenses. And there's a problem here that the doctrine doesn't fully solve. The 12 drones that survived the outer layers are now inside 2 miles, simultaneous with the missile, and the Phalanx has to make a targeting priority call in real time. This is the scenario where the swarm's mathematics partially succeed even in a losing fight. The CIWS cannot split its barrel. It picks the highest threat target. Something might get through. Layer 3 is Phalanx CIWS. The close-in weapon system is a 20mm M61 Vulcan Gatling gun mounted in a white radome housing that tracks, acquires, and fires without human intervention at ranges inside roughly 1.5 miles. It fires at 4,500 rounds per minute. In the 4 seconds of engagement time available against a Mach 2.5 Sea-Skimmer, it will put approximately 300 rounds downrange. It doesn't need a direct hit. The density of fire through which a missile must pass is enough to cause structural failure, warhead detonation at safe distance, or guidance system disruption. The naval term is catastrophic kill. The effect is a fireball 200 meters from the hull instead of a shaped charge detonation against the waterline. The sea-skimming missile detonates short. The fireball is close enough to be felt on the flight deck, close enough that damage control teams are already moving, but the hull is intact and the flight deck is clear. The 12 surviving drones are being engaged simultaneously by CIWS mounts on the carrier and the nearest destroyer. 7 are destroyed outright. 4 are disrupted and impact the water short of the hull. 1 makes contact with the destroyer's superstructure. The explosion is significant. The ship is not in danger of sinking, but it is burning, and its forward VLS cells are offline. The wave is over. The group is alive. The math, though, is sobering. What strikes me about this engagement is not what the Navy did right, and it did a great deal right. What strikes me is what the numbers reveal about the structural problem the carrier faces going forward. The group expended 6 SM-6 rounds, 23 ESSM rounds, and a substantial portion of 2 CIWS ammunition loads to defeat a 40-drone wave and 1 anti-ship missile. Total interceptor cost, somewhere north of $110 million. Total attacker cost, roughly $800,000. The exchange ratio is approximately 137 to 1 in the attacker's favor, measured in dollars per kill. The group's VLS magazine is now materially degraded. There is no resupply ship position to rearm at sea. A long-standing gap in US Navy logistics capability the service has acknowledged repeatedly. If a second wave launches within the next 6 hours, the group fights it with less. If a third wave follows the second, the math stops working entirely. Here's the take that'll probably get some pushback. The carrier didn't survive this engagement because of its defenses. It survived because the attacker launched only 40 drones. A force capable of sustaining 3 coordinated waves of this size, in sequence, would put the forward group in a position where the captain is making triage decisions about which ships to sacrifice to keep the carrier afloat. That is not a failure of the weapon systems. It is a structural vulnerability of the platform. And it's exactly why the Navy's own internal reviews have questioned whether a $13 billion hull is an appropriate centerpiece for a Pacific conflict with a peer adversary who has invested specifically in the mathematics of magazine exhaustion. The attacker's surface vessel, whatever launched that swarm, is already repositioning. Its radar signature is minimal, its launch tubes are reloadable, and it has just gathered extraordinarily valuable data about how the forward group's layered defense allocates shots under saturation pressure. The next wave will be designed around those allocation patterns. The destroyer that took the drone hit is conducting damage control. The fire is manageable. The crew is professional. There are injuries, but the ship is not lost. No names here, no faces. Just the institutional reality of what a swarm engagement costs the humans inside the machines. The Ford's air wing launches immediately post-engagement. F/A-18 Super Hornets pushing out beyond the group's radar horizon, searching for the launch vessel. If they find it, the arithmetic flips completely. A single Harpoon anti-ship missile strike on the launch vessel ends the problem. The challenge is finding it in time. This is the other side of the carrier's value equation. It doesn't just defend, it reaches. And that reach matters more than any amount of armor. Here is the final insight, and it reframes the entire carrier debate. A supercarrier is not a fortress. It has never been a fortress. The people who argue the Ford is too expensive to risk are measuring it against the wrong metric, treating it as a target that must survive, when its actual value is as a sensor and strike node that projects power. The E-2D Hawkeye orbiting at altitude is the reason this engagement was winnable. Not the SM-6, not the Phalanx. The Hawkeye gave the group a picture of the threat before the threat could see the group clearly. It turned 40 inbound contacts into 40 managed engagements rather than 40 simultaneous surprises. And the F/A-18S now hunting the launch vessel are the Ford's actual answer to the swarm problem, not intercepting the drones, but finding and eliminating the thing that makes them. That is force projection. That is what $13 billion actually buys. What keeps a carrier afloat is not its steel. It is its reach, the ability to see farther, strike farther, and make the enemy solve your response before it finishes solving its attack. One detail that stuck with me going through the doctrine on this: the magazine depth problem is known. It is documented. The Navy has been actively developing directed energy solutions, laser systems, and railguns, specifically because they offer effectively unlimited magazines against drone-class threats. The Gerald R. Ford is already wired for higher electrical power generation than any previous carrier class, in part because the architects knew this fight was coming. The ship was designed for a future weapon that isn't yet deployed. Whether that's foresight or a gamble depends on how fast the threat evolves. Will directed energy close the magazine depth gap before a peer adversary builds a swarm large enough to exhaust a strike group's interceptors? Comment YES if you think the technology gets there in time. No if you think the arithmetic wins first. Because that answer, not any single engagement, is what decides whether the supercarrier survives as a platform. The Ford group is still on station. The destroyer is burning less. The air wing is airborne and searching. And somewhere over the horizon, a reload is happening that nobody on the group can see yet. If this breakdown helped you think about naval warfare differently, not as a contest of steel, but as a contest of arithmetic. Subscribe and hit the bell. The next breakdown covers how the US Navy hunts the kind of surface vessel that launched that swarm. An asymmetric cat and mouse that ends not with a missile, but with a decision made from 30,000 feet. Comment ONI if you want that one next. The carrier is alive. The math, though, is still running.